Hello everyone, we'll get started in about 30 seconds. All right, so how's everyone doing? So today we will be talking about spousal RRSPs. And well, again, I'm trying to make these shorter so that it's easier for people to watch later on. So without further ado, let's get started. Very quick review, on the onset in terms of from the onset in terms of what are actually RRSPs. So registered retirement savings plans, what are those? And then we can better understand what a spousal RRSP actually is. All right, so an RRSP, a registered retirement savings plan, is really a type of account. It's not an investment, it's a type of account. That's incredibly important to understand. A lot of times I talk to people and they tell me, oh, I have, I'm invested in RRSPs. I'm like, oh, great. So what do you hold inside them? What do you mean? What do I hold inside them? RRSPs. I'm like, yes, that's a type of account, not an investment. So it's important to understand this. Both spousal RRSPs and standard RRSPs are types of accounts. So then you have to, once you open one, you have to also decide what you're going to be holding inside of said account, right? And now the primary purpose of both spousal and regular RRSPs is really to shift income between high earning years and low earning years. Most people tend to earn less money during retirement than during their working years. As a result, for most people, when you're using your standard RRSP, you're shifting income from high income years to your low income years, right? In retirement. So then you're taking the money back out and get taxed at a lower rate. If you're using a spousal one, you're able to shift from the higher income spouse to the lower income spouse potentially. And you can do that when you might be contributing now, and then your spouse, if they're in a lower income bracket, they can take the money out at a later date. That later date might be 20, 30, 40 years from now during retirement, or it could literally be 4 or 5 years down the line as well. So you don't have to wait until you're retired to take money out of RRSPs, both spousal and standard ones. You can contribute up to 18% of your income, up to a maximum of $27,230 for 2020. So basically, if you're making $10 million or something like that per year, the most you're allowed to contribute is $27,230, right? Regardless of what 18% of your income is, you're capped at $27,230. So that's literally the amount that you're really only allowed to contribute. And obviously, any contribution room that you've accumulated from previous years, you also are allowed to contribute that. So let me just show you what that means. So you see here for 2020, this is the amount, right? And we all, they've already announced what the sum will be for 2021 as well as for 2022. And then obviously in previous years, and these are the maximum allowable amounts to contribute, provided you're in that high income bracket. If you're only earning, let's say, $100,000, and only in this context here, obviously you're only allowed to contribute $18,000 because 18% of 100,000 is 18,000. If you're earning $50,000, the most you're allowed to contribute in any given year is that 18% of that, meaning $9,000. If last year you earned 50,000, this year you're earning also 15,000, you're allowed to contribute the combined 18,000 this year if that's what you want to do. All right. Contributions are tax deductible, so that will actually reduce any contribution to it will reduce your taxes. We discussed this in the past. Savings and investments grow tax-free while they're inside of the account. So as long as the money stays inside of the account, you don't have to pay any taxes. You're allowed to buy and sell investments as you go. That's not a problem. Just do not take the money out, because as soon as you take the money out, that counts as a withdrawal, and then that makes you lose your contribution room afterwards, with the exception of the home buyer plan and the lifelong learning plan. Again, we've discussed those in previous sessions. Some employers match your contribution, again, when it comes to RRSPs. And then contribution room is lost when money is withdrawn, as I said, with the exception of the home buyer plan and the lifelong learning plan. And then obviously when you withdraw money, any amount that you're withdrawing from it, from an RRSP or a spousal RRSP, is taxed as income. Depending on which province you live in certain cases, there might also be an additional 15% or thereabouts penalty for withdrawing early if you do that. Again, this is a bit of as I said, a pretty much a quick review, and I'll in case you missed my previous sessions when I was talking about this, I'll link to a document literally right here that you can consult on your own pace, or again, look at my previous videos. So the spousal RRSP has all of these same features really as a standard RRSP. And here you go. This is straight. There you go. Just shared this with you. Let me put the link to this in chat, and then after the video is done, I'll also include this in the video description. Okay, so this is straight from the Canada Revenue Agency. It's a relatively lengthy document at 45 pages. You don't have to read all of it, but I would highly encourage you to, at the very least, have a closer look at a table of contents here. Now, obviously, the thing that is most relevant to today's session is really this section over here, when we're going to be talking on page page 30, when we're going to be talking about the amounts paid from or into a spousal or common law and common partner RRSP. Okay, so we'll be focusing on this, but you can learn a lot more about all of these RRSP, about how RRSPs work, as spouses in common law RRSPs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you see here from page 13 and then page 30 as well. To look at here they're looking at contributions, and here they're looking at withdrawals and what gets taxed and so on and so forth. So I'll be kind of focusing on those two aspects as we're going along here. Okay. So whenever you're contributing to a spousal RRSP, you're literally using your own contribution room that you've accumulated, and you're creating an account in your spouse's name. So you're using your own contribution room to contribute to open up an account in your spouse's name. Okay, and it allows you to shift income from you to your spouse, and from your spouse to you if they create one in your name, if they're the higher income earner. So again, when it makes the most sense to contribute to these, again, I'll have a couple of examples coming up right after this. So I want to spend most of the time today really focusing on the examples and drilling down the actual applicable ways to use this, instead of just kind of looking at the theory. So this can be pretty much a very viable strategy to income split, especially if one of you is a stay-at-home parent, for instance, especially these days with COVID. So if only one of you is working, and as a result, there's a big income discrepancy, and especially if the person who is higher income, it is earning at least $90,000, $80,000 thereabouts and higher. In those cases, this strategy makes a lot of sense. And again, we'll see implementations of this literally on the very next slide. Very important to keep in mind as well is that after 3 years, the money inside of a spouse's RRSP becomes their money. It's no longer attributable back to the original contributing spouse. So let's say if my spouse earns $200,000 and I'm earning $50,000, it would make a lot more sense for them to open a spousal RRSP for me, because they would get a much larger tax refund by contributing at their higher income tax rate than for me. However, if I take the money out within the first 3 years, it counts as though they would be taking the money out themselves, and it becomes taxable in their hands. So the optimal way to use a spousal RRSP is to make sure that if you're the contributing spouse, making sure that your spouse doesn't take the money out for at least 3 years and a day. Otherwise, it sort of defeats the primary purpose. Might as well have contributed to your own and lose that contribution room and have the taxes be attributable back to you. All right. And keep in mind, the same way that a registered retirement savings plan gets converted into a registered retirement income fund at age 70, well, technically speaking, on January 1st, following the year that you've turned 71 in, the exact same thing happens with a spousal RRSP. Now, why does this matter is because once an RRSP becomes an RRIF, whether it's spousal or not, you can no longer contribute to it. And furthermore, you have to start withdrawing money based on a predetermined table that is set up by the federal government. And you have to basically withdraw those sums. Now, again, with COVID-19 this year, they've reduced the minimum withdrawal requirements by, I believe, about 25%. So it used to be around 7%. Right now, I think they only require you to withdraw about 5% basically on in the year following the year you turn 71. And then going forward, you have to withdraw ever larger sums of money. So the reason why you might consider having both an RSP in your name and one in your spouse's name is that way, if you do really, really well and you save a ridiculous amount of money and you invest a ridiculous amount of money by the time you retire, by the time your RSPs become RRIFs, by having two separate accounts where you're continuously withdrawing smaller sums of money instead of just one that you have to withdraw very large sums of money, at the end of the day, you will be paying substantially less taxes. Furthermore, again, if there is this big discrepancy in income between the two spouses, it makes a lot of sense for the higher income earning to contribute to a spousal one, and then the spouse can withdraw that money even before they retire, and it becomes taxable in their hands at a much, much lower rate. Furthermore, if your spouse wants to take, a sabbatical or a year off, that's another excellent way for you to get your big tax refund. And then within 3 years plus 1 day after you've contributed to the spousal RSP, your spouse is able to withdraw that money with a relatively minimal amount of taxes owed at that point in time. So that's sort of the theory behind it, right? So let's now focus for the second half of this. Let's focus on actual legitimate examples and see exactly how this works. Now, the taxation rates that I'm using over here are specifically from Quebec. So these are the taxation rates for 2020. What we want to focus on here is obviously the other income column over here, because regular income is considered other income. And for tax purposes, whenever you're withdrawing money out of a RRSP or a spousal RSP, it gets treated the same as other income, i.e. the same way that you would normally tax regular salaried income. All right, so let's consider this scenario and see which one would make most sense and why you would consider contributing to a spousal RSP, whether you should split it evenly or what would exactly happen. So let's assume you make $200,000 a year. So that puts you roughly in the top 2% of income earners in Canada, right? So at that point in time, if you happen to live in 200. I just noticed a mistake here because this is actually an example I've used in the past. So this is actually not 49. I should have adjusted that. It's basically so that the tax rate has actually changed. So it used to be 49%. So that was last year. It's 50.15% now. Apologies for that. I just realized this by looking down there. So here you go. Okay. So the tax rate is that, and then for the other one, that one I updated correctly. So your spouse makes $40,000, so they're in the 27.53% tax bracket. Now the two of you managed to save $20,000, and then obviously you're allowed to contribute 18% of your income, right? So 18% of your income, obviously in this case, would be substantially more than 20,000. The maximum allowable is just above that. So technically speaking, the higher income spouse would be allowed to contribute the full $20,000 to either their own RRSP, create a spousal RRSP, or split it evenly. Half, 10,000 to their own, 10,000 to the spouse, right? Now, should the lower income spouse open up their own RRSP and contribute to their own RRSP? In this situation, it would make very little sense. The only time that would be at all a reasonable approach, or something that would actually make sense, is if, in this case, people don't share their income, right? So in some couples, right, everyone manages their own money. They don't share, they don't pool their money together. So obviously in those cases, every person invests for themselves. But then again, there's no point in trying to use a spousal RRSP, right? So let's assume that both of these individuals are fine with sharing their incomes. And at this point in time, yes, it would make very little sense for the lower income spouse to contribute to theirs. Why? Well, if they contribute $20,000 to their RRSP, they're going to be getting back 27.53% of that, which was withheld in combined provincial and federal income taxes. Again, these percentages in this scenario here are specifically for Quebec, okay? If you're in a different Canadian province, again, figure out what your combined federal and provincial income tax brackets are, and run the numbers with that. So as I was saying, in this case, if the lower income spouse would be contributing to the full $20,000, right? So you have the spouse, so the lower income, if they contribute $20,000 to their own RRSP, or half it to theirs and half to yours, so like if they put it into their own RRSP, at that point in time, first of all, they would only be allowed to contribute basically 18% of 40,000, right? They could not put the full the full 20,000, so they would only be allowed to contribute 7,200, right? So at that point in time, if they contribute 7,200, on that 7,200, they would get 27.53. They would basically get a tax refund of $1,982.16, which is not terrible, but is not great, right? And then the remaining, 12,800 would have to be used by the higher income spouse. Now let's have a look at if I'm just going to say HIS, so that's higher income. Let's just say higher income, just S like that. Higher income, and then LI for lower income, right? So that we're not getting confused. So LI here, okay, there we go. I need to charge my little pen here. It's refusing to work. So lower income spouse is doing that. Now, what if the higher income spouse contributes the full 20,000 and they're allowed to contribute the full 20,000? Let's say they're contributing it to an RRSP, right? And then option number 2 here, they're going to be contributing the full 20,000 to a spousal RRSP, right? And then option number 3, they split it between 10K inside of an RRSP and plus 10K in the spousal. Okay, so and let's see where which one makes the most sense. So if they contribute 20,000 inside of a standard RRSP, are they allowed to contribute 20,000? Yes, they're allowed to do that. So at that point, you get 20,000, and they would get a 49. They would get. Yeah, so they would get a 50.15% tax refund, so 0.5015. So that means they would literally on that 20,000, they would get a full $10,030. Whereas in this case, yeah, you would get 1,900, and then the higher income spouse would contribute to 12,800 multiplied by 0.15. And that would be another 6,419.20, giving you a total of 104 and 78, right? So here in this case, you're getting $8,401.36. In this other case, if it's the higher income spouse that is contributing, you're getting a full $1,600 more. And this is guaranteed $1,600. You don't have to do any fancy investing. You don't have to do anything. So why would you ever not want to get an extra $1,600, right? Now, it doesn't matter if the spouse, if the higher income spouse contributes to their own or to a spousal one. In both cases, they would still get $10,030 paid out. Okay. In the case of if they're doing half and half, then it would be $5,015 and $5,015, right? So now, when would it make the most sense to just contribute to their own, right? In most cases, it only really makes most sense to contribute to their own if they're foreseeing taking, a year off, or maybe spending a year or two trying a startup, for example, where they're foreseeing having very, very limited income during that point in time. At that point, yes, sure, you're the higher income spouse. You can contribute to your own RRSP, and then you figure, sure, I'm kind of losing out on the tax-free growth long term, so that's not optimal. But let's say you have a ton of money already invested, so you're not really worried about long term. So that would be one way to, in the relatively shorter term, to literally shift the money from high income years, get the $10,030 in refund, and obviously you can use this $10,030 to maybe max out your TFSA if you haven't done so already, or put more of it into non-registered accounts, etc. And then invest. Obviously, you're investing those $20,000 at that point in time, right? And then once you want to take that sabbatical, or maybe a paternity leave, or for whatever reason your income is lower at that point in time, that's when you can use it, right? Or again, you can wait until you retire. Alternatively, if you're contributing all of it just to your spouse, in this case, the assumption would be that your spouse is less likely to earn as much as you, pretty much until retirement. And then you can both keep it for the long term, where your spouse can just use it in retirement because maybe they have fewer investments than you already have. Or same thing, they can then withdraw it some point in time earlier on before they retire, if there's already other investments in place, or if they wanted to take, again, a year off or what have you, right? Now, when would it make most sense to split it evenly like this is, now assume that both of these individuals have just started working right now, right? So they just graduated, one maybe with an MBA or an MD or something that basically gives you access from the get-go to a very high income level, and the other person with a bachelor in something else, right? So assume they've never worked before. So this is literally the very first year that they're both earning money and that they have RRSP contribution available to them, right? So at that point in time, both of those individuals are very young. So there's quite a bit of, upwards movement when it comes to earning more in the future. They might have 20, 30, 40 years of work life ahead of them. But in both instances, right? So if none of those two individuals have any investments, and you plan on using it really just for the long term, you're not planning on having either one of the spouses take. And again, I use the word spouse, but this also applies to common law partners, by the way. Okay, so the same thing can be used for common law partners. You don't have to be legally married in Canada, at least, for this to work out. So whenever I say spousal, it's literally the same thing can be opened for. You can open a common law partner / spousal RRSP. It's the same thing. Okay. So at this point in time, why would you want to split it? Well, again, if the idea is to use it long term, at that point in time, both of you, as you're getting closer to retirement and as you're about to retire, both of you can start withdrawing money from it. And then especially if you're not touching your RRSPs until you're 72, basically, and then you're forced to withdraw the money by the fact that the RRSP gets converted into an RRIF. At least at that point in time, you will be taxed less, because imagine if both of you have, let's say, $1 million and your minimum withdrawal is, 5%. Both of you have to withdraw $50,000 from it, right? Which at that point in time, that's a relatively low tax rate. Whereas if only one person has 100,000, whether that has contributed everything, as a result, they have, let's say, $2 million and the minimum withdrawal rate is 5%. 5% of $2 million is $100,000. $100,000, assuming tax rates remain more or less the same in 30 or 40 years from now, which is a big guess, but at that point in time, that would be 45% versus, if you only have 50,000 worth of income, that would be 37%. So that's a 10% lower tax rate if you're splitting it versus if only one person kept all of it. And as I said, in some cases, it might make sense for the long term to have it all in one person's account if the other person has already a massive RSP built up for themselves. Okay. All right. So let's look at one final example in the last few minutes here. And I'm trying to, it's pretty much the same example, but let's be more realistic with the numbers, because again, a lot of you might say, $200,000 first year out of school. Yeah, good luck with that. I mean, sure, there are a few people that earn that, but that's not really realistic. That's not what the average Canadian will experience, and that's true. So all right, so let's say you make $44,000 and your spouse makes $60,000. And now at this point, both of you managed to save $10,000 combined. In this case, which one should contribute to which one's RRSP? Should you both contribute to your own individual RRSPs? Obviously, in this case, your spouse has almost 10%, would receive almost 10% more of a tax refund than you yourself. So that starts being interesting already, right? Now, the key question there, because these are still relatively low salaries in the grand scheme of things, you have to look at how much upwards mobility do you and your spouse have in the next 2 to 5 years once you have a bit more experience, or maybe even 10 years. How likely are you to earn substantially more than $44,000, and how likely is your spouse going to be to earn more than $60,000? So when it really starts making sense to contribute is once you are in this, 89,000 plus range. This would be ideal. Like, if you foresee being able to start earning at least $89,000 or thereabouts, or again, you look at whatever your tax bracket is in your respective province. But I would say, yeah, you would have to wait until you're in about the 4th or 5th tax bracket in your respective province for it to start making sense. Unless there's literally, you love what you're doing, you're not doing it for the money, you're not doing it to become ridiculously wealthy, you're just doing it because you're really truly passionate about what you're doing, and it's very unlikely you're going to be earning a ton extra money, or you might be earning $5,000 more 10 years from now or something like that. So in those cases, sure, it starts making sense to contribute to your RSP early on as well. But as I always say, max out your TFSA first. When you're earning less than, this $80,000-ish bracket, $70,000 tax bracket, again, depending on what province you're in, max out your TFSA first, okay? Obviously, when you're contributing to your TFSA, there's no tax refund, so that's a negative for sure. But at the same time, you get a lot more flexibility. You're able to take money out whenever you want. There's no tax payable on that money. You don't have to declare it, as a matter of fact, as income when you're taking money out of a TFSA. Whereas when you're taking out money out of a spousal RRSP or a standard RRSP, not only is it declarable as income, and it might affect other benefits if you're waiting until retirement, such as OAS, or old age security, but it'll also be taxable. And in certain cases, you might also have to pay a certain withdrawal fee if you're taking out earlier on. And again, in some cases, it might make sense to pay a 10 or 15% withdrawal fee and minimal taxes if you're taking it in your 30s or 40s to be home maybe for a year with your child or start a business or what have you, because at that point in time, growing that money in a situation where you already have quite a few investments, or you foresee having quite a few investments by retirement, you would be taxed a lot anyway if you end up in the enviable position of having having done so well investing that you're stuck in a high income bracket, just withdrawing the minimum requirements from an RRIF. So what should you do in this case? So again, I would say, keep in mind, I'm not a licensed professional, but just looking at the math, if you're likely to move forward and move higher in a higher income bracket within the next, 10 years or so, max out your TFSA first. If you're having children, consider maybe contributing to their RESP first as well. And again, in this case, I'm also assuming none of these two individuals have any form of employer matching, because keep in mind, both RRSPs and spousal RRSPs, depending on how they're structured, the employers in certain cases might match a certain amount as well. So that could also be an additional interesting feature to consider, right? But from the basic here, let's assume there's no employer matching. So what would make the most sense? As I said, max out your TFSA first if you foresee being able to earn more. If not, still max out your TFSA first in most cases, just because of the massive tax advantages. Make sure it's a properly balanced, diversified portfolio. And then, sure, you can start contributing. But at that point, it's not a huge difference, but it's still almost 10%, 9.4, 9.6% or thereabouts. I would say definitely try to have the higher income spouse either create a spousal and contribute the full. So at this point, they would be able to contribute 18% of 60,000, right? So there we go. So that would be 10,800. So obviously the full $10,000 can be contributed in just one account if that's what they want to do, or they can split it evenly the same way that we've seen before. So in that case, TFSA first. If you foresee earning more in the future, if not, then you might contemplate whether either one of the two spouses is planning on taking some time off for whatever reason, a sabbatical or what have you, within 3 years plus 1 month, plus 1 day. Sorry, keep in mind for spousal, for it not to be attributable back to the original contributing spouse, it has to be 3 years plus 1 day. If that's the case, then you can consider RRSP or spousal RRSP. But from, again, still by the higher income one, income spouse, right? So they're the one that you want to be contributing to the actual account. Because you get that extra 10% roughly, right? So those are a few of the considerations to look at when to use a spousal RRSP. And then how do things get taxed? Again, if you're waiting for the 3 years plus 1 day, then it's no longer attributable toward the original spouse. It gets taxed as just regular income from the spouse that takes it out. And it's all about choices, right? So you have to figure out how likely are you to make more money? Do you have other investments that you already will be able to withdraw in retirement? Are either one of you planning on taking time off? And then you can look at that and use this efficiently and effectively. So that's pretty much it for today. I hope that was useful. I might have a short video with other more specific examples maybe coming up soon for RRSPs, probably within a couple of weeks or so. So maybe have a look out for that. I hope this was useful. I'll make sure to include the links in the description down below, and see you next time. Take care, everybody.